So I'm gonna throw a kind of controversial concept at you. Disney movies suck. Now, obviously there's gonna be a lot of negative backlash to that, and if you are a diehard Disney fan, I do expect to see some hate comments down below, and if you don't, you're going to disappoint me. But, all those jokes aside, guys, specifically what I'm gonna be talking about before you turn off this video is the whole recent live action push that Disney has been going for. Beauty and the Beast and Kim Possible, and in this particular instance, A Wrinkle in Time in a live action format. Now obviously, when I bring up The Wrinkle in Time, that's not something that they've done in animated form, at least that I'm aware of, but my concern is the way that they handled the new installation, The Wrinkle in Time, that we're now currently having to put up with, basically. And I say that as someone who went into this really, really wanting to enjoy this movie. A Wrinkle in Time is a classic book that rivals a lot of the other classic books that I had to read in English literature when I was a kid. And I'm saying this as someone who didn't give a shit about Catcher in the Rye, didn't give a shit about Outsiders, didn't give a shit about a bunch of other classic books that you might be familiar with. The main problem with a lot of this is I didn't enjoy reading a lot of them originally, and only Great Gatsby, the newer film that came out, really got my attention. And it wasn't a whole lot of substance, it was a lot of pretty. And I feel like in this Disneyification of Wrinkle in Time, that in a summary is what we got. Wrinkle in Time, in this particular version, it was so heavily CGI that you have to marvel at the amount of work that went into this particular film. It was absolutely beautiful, but the story was garbage. And I say that as someone who enjoyed A Wrinkle in Time reading the book. There was a lot of interesting subtext and ideas that were in the original, and a lot of that, you know, can be attributed to over-analysis of the original text, like, you know, English teachers tend to like to do. They read into things to the nth degree. But no, in this particular one, there was actually a feasible, interesting plot line that could reasonably be co-opted into a more modern interpretation without a whole lot of issues. You're going against a great, unknown, undefinable, really evil, but a lot of the ground elements that made Wrinkle in Time really interesting was the fact that they had a prodigy young daughter and a super prodigy younger son who were basically in tune with the universe, and because of this it ended up putting a lot of things together to bring them together with people who could help them reunite with their father, who disappeared under mysterious circumstances that are later revealed in the film. But so my point being with this is that the way that the film does this feels very lacking. There's this issue where throughout the majority of the film it feels like all of the reasons why things were happening were not well established. And this has a lot to do with, first of all, how the main characters were introduced, how their personal psyche was developed as characters. They started on a very weak base. I feel like there was definitely some context clues as to how you were supposed to pick up certain attributes that are synonymous with the actual characters that we are familiar with. But the problem lies sort of in the way it was executed. There was so much show rather than tell, but there was so much tell as well. And the problem with that particular attitude is it can work. It can definitely work. There are definitely instances where showing rather than telling is the golden rule. In fact, it is the golden rule in most film instances, is to show rather than tell, so that the audience is informed. There is obviously some instances where it's very, very difficult to do that, but you generally try to do this 9-10 times out of 10. And this just, I feel like they were attempting to do that, but a lot of the imagery felt very forced and as though we were supposed to be getting a subtext that didn't seem to be there. And I say this as someone who, when I was watching the scene where we were first kind of introduced to this whole school having this sort of hate boner towards the girl, the main female protagonist, you didn't really have well communicated the reasons anyone really disliked her. You didn't have this sense of the entire school being against her. It just felt like a very typical, oh hey look, here's the group of popular kids who for some reason don't like the nerdy girl for reasons that aren't hugely explained in any capacity. You didn't get this feeling that she felt alienated in any way. And then you also have, of course, the other main character. God, the problem is, after watching this, remembering the character names is actually difficult. You go through this process of trying to figure out why people don't like her. They kind of sort of tell you, but it doesn't feel like it's cemented very well. But she's coming across this attitude of her being consistently very rebellious and sort of acting out a lot for reasons that feel, at least the way it's presented, it feels very weak. And I don't know what it is. It just seems like the way it's presented, rather than the actual elements that are there being less than concrete. And I was ranting about this actually after watching the actual movie, and I really wanted to enjoy this because the trailer looked amazing. And then of course you have the fact that the younger son, it was kind of established that he's got all these sort of, it's established that he's very intelligent. So you're kind of okay going off of just that. Now what the book itself goes into is that he has this ability to read the mind of different characters. And that would make a lot more sense, but it's never really aptly communicated in any sort of way or made clear. I think there's one scene where the main female character comes down from a stormy night, which is bothering her, and he's already kind of got all her favorites sort of set up and ready for her, which I think was them attempting to show that, but it didn't get communicated. And I actually learned this afterwards, after having a bit of a refresher on the book, as well as looking up the actual plot and the elements that were supposed to be there that necessarily didn't get communicated. Okay, and then of course you have the nice guy communicator dude who was basically there for no reason, and he ended up serving as more of a, oh hey look, here's the dangers that the main female character is completely aware of the whole time, but neither really says anything to dissuade the person that is clearly falling for it way too easily. That was one of my real complaints, is the fact that it feels like the characters have this issue of going from being competent to completely incompetent. And you have the especially large issue of feeling like the male companion character, who I think there was a minor like love triangle attempt going on there, but they sort of just didn't pay that off. It was very much like, okay, I'll give you a hug or whatever, which I think was okay, but it felt more like there was supposed to be more to it there, at least based on the music and the way it was cut and just the general atmosphere that they built around this. And there was that there. A lot of things didn't end up getting resolved the way I expected them to, in a way that didn't feel very satisfying is my problem. Whether or not that is an issue with the original story material or the very clear and noted in a lot of the reviews actually, the deviations that they actually went into in the actual plot. They did a lot to try and deviate from the original, to try and give it a better sense of modernization, I think is the attempt, what they were trying to do, just based on my experience in the film. But personally, I felt like it didn't actually do the plot justice. It didn't build any sort of cohesiveness. It felt like one of the main male romantic interest character was basically there for no reason, even though they stated he was a good negotiator. That never got paid off. Her finally getting over her fears of her dad never really paid off. Her getting more and more powerful over time felt really weird. It didn't have any sort of element of this is why this is building up or why she's gaining more control of it, even though she hasn't had control of it before. So a lot of things felt very unexplained or kind of just ignored, and it led to a lot of very just confusing scene transitions as, why are we doing this? We don't understand the motivation for a lot of this stuff. And I noticed that in like every scene. It was just kind of like, blah, 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 okay, we've got an interesting scene going here. We've got a little bit of momentum. And we're transitioning. Why? Don't know. There's not like been any indication that we need to transition for any real reason in this entire monologue or whatever we're doing, or this action piece, or anything. It feels like the majority of the time there's no solid transition. And it frustrates me because the person directing this film is a female ethnic minority. And so with that, you have to kind of be like, okay, I really want this to be a good film. You know, it's a good representation. And I have friends who fit within that particular demographic that I want to be represented well, obviously, in the sense that demonstrate that someone of that particular... It didn't pull through in the way I would have liked it to, so it was frustrating on that angle. But anyway, my point being, guys, I feel like I'm like very everywhere, but... So in summary, guys, what I'm trying to say is there are a lot of elements to Wrinkle of Time that felt very disjointed. They didn't make a lot of sense. There was a lack of solid scene transitions, and the characters felt very boring, flat, and they didn't develop in a way that made a whole lot of logical sense based on what had previously happened throughout the film. There were also some minor elements that really, I was just kind of like, why the fuck is that in there? One of the really notable ones was the character constantly noting on really liking her hair. Now, the specific context of why I felt that was a little bit weird, and I would say even just creepy, was this whole context of something that I see specifically black women bring up all the time, is people complimenting or talking about their hair, and it's not in a way that generally comes off as very complimentary. It comes off as almost this ethnic interest fetishized sense, and I don't know if it was meant not to come across that way. I don't think it was, given the person who was directing. I think it was supposed to be like an actual compliment and it didn't intend to come off as creepy, but it really, really did. And just the fact that it kept coming up randomly with very little real motivation behind it, it just felt like, okay, that's a random compliment on something very specific about her that feels very non sequitur, and it honestly, it just makes me really uncomfortable that you're just suddenly like she had an issue with her self-worth or something, and he starts mentioning on her hair. It's like, okay, well, that's like super tangential. She never gave any indication that's what she was uncomfortable about, rather than the fact that, you know, without her father, she's dealing with a lot of, you know, emotional trauma and anything regarding that. And then, of course, you had the random insert of the fact that he was dealing with his father being very upset with the fact that he's not performing to a standard that is in a lot of ways incredibly unrealistic. So there was like a lot of really weird ways that their backstory was attempted to be implemented and structured in a way that felt really disjointed and confusing, and at times really, really creepy, the way that their interactions went, despite them being essentially a love interest angle kind of connotation to their interactions. So it just felt very off for me. Now, I don't know if that is me reaching. If it is, I mean, that's totally a valid opinion to think, and I might just be, you know, overextending my own personal biases or understanding of things, but it felt like even just in the shooting of the actual scene, it seemed like that almost made them more uncomfortable. That's at least the body language that stood out to me in that particular scene that I mentioned earlier. But anyway, guys, that is just my thoughts on Wrinkle in Time. It was a weird, strange mess that was really, 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 really pretty. That is the best way I can put it. It was a mess that was pretty, and it makes me really, really, really nervous for the new Kim Possible live-action movie that comes out under Disney's heading as well, because even though it's being written by the original creators, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be handled, directed by the same people, whether it's going to be handled with the same care and dedication as the previous people who handled Kim Possible. And it makes me nervous whenever I see a live action from Disney, because they have a bit of a track record of being, pardon my French, but fucking atrocious. And honestly, Kim Possible is something I've held close to my heart for a long time, so if they fuck it up, I'm gonna be pissed. But anyway, guys, that is really all I have to say. Main point is Wrinkle in Time is not something worth going out to see, which is incredibly disappointing because it's a great book, and I recommend reading the novelization. If not first, then just. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Every time you guys watch one of these videos, you talk to me, you critique me, whatever you happen to want to do, it's totally fine. I appreciate it.